You are listening to the Tank Magazine podcast. In this episode, Justin E.H. Smith reads his essay, Party Animal, an education in individual expression and the importance of solidarity. Smith is Professor of History and Philosophy of Science at the University of Paris, Denis Diderot. He is also the author of The Philosopher, A History in Six Types, and Nature, Human Nature and Human Difference, Race in Early Modern Philosophy. The text version of this piece is published in the Tank Party issue.
I comb my remaining hairs across the top of my head from left to right, and a line forms, extending from front to back on the left side, separating the rightward combed strands from their downward hanging comrades to the lower left. In French, this dividing line, which is in itself nothing, a strip of baldness, is called, like the crevice between the buttocks or the Salacian fish related to the shark and the skate, une raie, while in American English it is a part. Both of these words have an august Latin pedigree, radius in the one case, which yields up ray and rayon and radiant, and pars in the other, which gives us, among other fine words, party. Now, a party can be many things. Lenin had one, and so, if you live in an American college town, did the rambunctious frat house down the street. But in its essence, it is never so different from the part of the hair. It is some people going off in one way, like the hairs on my head, others going off in another. I have long insisted that there are only three reasons to go to a party: to get, as they say, fucked up, to pursue erotic intrigue, and to advance one's social standing. The first two of these are either irrelevant or forbidden to me at this stage of life, and the last of them is almost always better accomplished by sitting at home and writing. And so I seldom go to parties. But I remember them. I remember not yet being able to distinguish these three distinct functions, and how they would all swirl about confusedly in my soul as I arrived at the venue, and everything was charged with such an unbelievable potentiality, where anything could happen. In reality, what did happen was a disaster. Once, on the occasion of my 16th birthday, when Mom was out of town and we lived out in some chicken farming town in California's Central Valley, the local Anglo-maniac two-tone rude boys, or however they thought of themselves, crashed the scene and made off with all of my ska records. It was accepted without argument that no non-member of a youth subculture had the right to possess that subculture's music. Making his escape, one of them collided on his Vespa with a pickup truck pulling out of the Country Comfort Lounge, about a mile from our house. The next morning, after the cop cars and ambulances had cleared out, dozens of specials and selector records littered the muddy ditches of our rural route. That was a fairly good party. Not long before or after this crowning moment, sometime in the summer of 1988, I walked out to our mailbox and found my membership card for the Young Socialist Alliance, accompanied by a typewritten letter filled with both practical information as well as elevated rhetoric about the youth being the future. I had heard that kind of talk before at Catholic Youth Organization meetings, and was annoyed that I was being made to join the mere youth auxiliary of the Socialist Workers' Party. But I was 16 and those were the rules, and I was happy enough to now be officially linked to the largest association of Trotskyists in the United States, whose publishing wing, Pathfinder Press, had already taught me so much about the larger world beyond the Sacramento Valley. By the following year, I had obtained another official document with my name on it, from the Department of Motor Vehicles, which enabled me to drive to the Socialist Worker Party's National Convention at Oberlin College, near Cleveland. It enabled me, while Mom, for some mysterious reason, permitted me. In what would have been my junior year, I had stopped attending high school for some months out of sheer stubbornness and didn't seem to have any other concrete plans. So driving off to do something at a university might have been hoped to hold open the possibility of what was known, even then, as a positive influence. So I made it through the high desert of Nevada, through the salt flats of Utah, through the locust plagues of Nebraska, through Illinois, Indiana, and, finally, the state in which I would much later reside for 2 years and where I am still registered to vote, bleak, pseudo-palindromic Ohio, microcosm of all that is worst of these United States, the state about which Whitman had the most trouble rhapsodizing. But it was all new and fresh to me in 1988, and I was happy to go to some bohemian cafe in the little town next to the campus and meet some dude named Harold who wore the best thrift shop sweaters and knew more trivia about the residents and throbbing gristle than I did. Harold, man, what a cool guy. I stayed in some dorm with a third world theme. It was late summer, as I recall, and the students were not around. So all I had were the traces of them. This was my first real visit to a university campus, and I found myself within one of the headquarters of student activism, with its rousing slogans and amateurish wall paintings of Marcus Garvey and Emma Goldman. I wanted to get into it, but I found that the setting was, well, something I could not yet put into words, but that I now recognize in distant retrospect whenever I am around people whose social identity is rooted in their sincere political commitments. It was condescending, straight-faced, literal-minded, and boring. I did not need these slogans. I did not need to be told what to think, as if without their simple visual aids I would not have been thinking at all. I needed weird, cryptic, inscrutable expressions of underground culture, where the political valence requires hard interpretative work. I wanted to go back and find Harold and listen to the residents together. The Socialist Workers' Party Congress had not even begun, but by the end of the first night at Oberlin, some kind of dim consciousness was sinking in, of the tension between the things I value most, the things that arise from the belief, often stubborn, often insane or monstrous, of individuals in their own unique expressive power, on the one hand, and, on the other, solidarity. Solidarity comes much more easily to many people I know than it does to me. I hate the call and response ritual of political demonstrations. I am terrified of, even phobic about, rallies, no matter what principle or objective quickens them. After my Young Socialist Alliance affiliation lapsed in 1989, I would never again become a member of any political organization or party. Well, I'm exaggerating a bit. I was a Teamster when I worked briefly as a parking lot attendant in 1990, and I am currently a member, by default, of the Syndicat Général de l'Éducation Nationale, a French labor union representing my interests, so I'm told, as a university professor. I also joined the PEN American Center shortly after the Charlie Hebdo assassinations in early 2015, being convinced that there was a place for me in an organization dedicated to the global defense of free speech. But honestly, PEN is an organization of writers, in the same way that the Dairy Farmers of America is an association of dairy farmers. But do we really have something that unites us, as they do? If so, I have not yet discovered what that might be. I am prepared to admit that for some years now I have considered myself an anarchist, as long as you will understand that I do not mean the kind who has ever even considered taunting a mall security guard or throwing a bomb. I take it that anarchism offers no sort of prescription for the world we might wish to bring about, but rather an accurate description of how much of the world is and always has been. The most lucid anarchists are geographers and anthropologists, like Élisée Reclus or Pierre Clastres, watching how people in fact behave, grasping how irrelevant states and parties are for so much of what goes on. Here, for example, is something a well-known partisan recommended for the advancement of his party's cause. Comrades, the uprising by the 5 kulak volosts must be mercilessly suppressed. The interest of the entire revolution demands this, for we are now facing everywhere the final decisive battle with the kulaks. We need to set an example. This is, once again, Lenin in a 1918 telegraph from Moscow to the communists of Penza. Lenin implored them further. You need to hang without fail, so that people see no fewer than 100 of the notorious kulaks, the rich and the bloodsuckers. Is this now the work of a secretary or a chairman? Or is it not, despite the passage of centuries and changes in the names of the ranks, more or less the same ebb and flow that brought the Mongol leader Batu Khan to cross the Volga and besiege Moscow in 1238? We speak of the horde and we imagine scenes of gross torture and spectacle. We speak of the party and we imagine pushed papers and the rubber stamps of bureaucrats who are, if not themselves rational, at least working in the service of reason. But let us not be fooled by superficial makeovers. Consider, too, what can now only ironically be called the Party of Lincoln. Donald Trump wished to become President of the United States, as the political arrangement at the time of his decision had no opening for emperor, tsar, or despot. So he joined the Republican Party, not to advance its ends, but his. The GOP, it turns out, had no defining principles at all, no sine qua non commitments without which the metaphysical conditions for identity over time could not hold. The Republican Party is whatever the most powerful or menacing figure claiming to speak for it says it is, and the fools in the party who do not see this, or the groveling shits who do see it but remain anyway, may as well have joined up with a step-combing clan under the control of an illiterate, murderous warlord. The party leader, I could prove with countless more examples, is the warlord made to don a tie. Maps of old would give, for regions or continents cut in two by the edges of the paper, the label of part. The part of Africa that was included in a map of the Mediterranean was called Pars Africae, that of Arabia in a map of the Levant, Pars Arabiae, and that of the unending expanse of the Russian Empire east of the Urals, Pars Asiae. How it is that Russia, which Marine Le Pen recently declared to be part of the Europe of nations, could also contain within it a part of Asia, is something that has worried Russians at least since Peter the Great. It is as if the part here is not one of assemblage, but of mixture. Russia contains a part of Asia in the same way that a pound cake contains 1 part butter. But still, whatever the complex history of migrations and conquests, the map can at least help us to settle a few matters. Asia runs off to the east of the Urals, Europe to the west. The Urals, we might say, are the part of Russia, extending in both directions across Eurasia like a comb-over that knows it's stretching it. Russia is parted, but the party that seized power in 1917 went all union, as they say, became, as the Soviet national anthem had it, the popular will, constituting the singular powerful Soviet Union. The USSR technically never had a head of state, since the party secretary was only head of the party, and what kept the party in power was only, well, power itself, of the sort we saw unleashed upon the kulaks in 1918. It is not for ideological reasons, but for Mariological ones, when I say that a one-party system is a contradiction in terms. Parties, or if you will, proper parties, have a share in something larger. To be a party is to be in perpetual contest against other parties, not to eliminate them. Once they are gone, you don't have a party, but a whole E. For my part, as I've said, I am a member of no party, nor do I go to parties. But it was not always like this. Once, in Leningrad, in 1991, I was up on a rooftop with my friend Vitaly. This was at the time of the putsch of the hardline communist generals against Gorbachev, who they knew was about to dissolve the Union. Vitaly had been in and out of Soviet jails in the 1980s for crimes like trading bootlegged Beatles cassettes, common hooliganism, partying. During the putsch, he passed the time drinking vodka and walking along the balustrade on the roof of his mom's high-rise apartment building. I saw him do it. I wasn't there the day he fell and died, though I feel as though I was. His funeral was a sort of travesty of a party, like all celebrations in the Slavic world, straddling the boundary, the part, between mournfulness and elation. We kissed his foundation-caked forehead in the open casket as the hunchbacked gravediggers labored. Then we closed the casket and lowered him into the ground, pouring vodka and throwing cigarettes in after him. His mom wailed and laughed. I don't know if anyone's social standing was advanced, or if anyone found erotic intrigue that day, though I suppose in a sense Vitaly got as fucked up as you can get. That was, in its way, a good party. I left Russia. The Soviet Union collapsed. Life went on. Through 1990's American triumphalism, the discovery of a new enemy in Islam, scattered hecatombs. The Soviet Union, which the headlines of 1991 told us had been sent to the scrap heap of history, could no longer be found even there. By the early 2010s, my students, for the most part, had never heard of it. A thick, squinty little man gradually consolidated power among the scraps and sought to restore something of what had been lost, but now unencumbered by utopian rhetoric. Post-Soviet Russia is not the same thing as what preceded it, and yet we all know that Putin, in some sense, is the heir to an imperial throne that had previously sat both tsars and secretaries. By 2016, it had become clear that this throne was directing, or inspiring, or distally causing, like some unmoved mover, unusual disturbances within the American Party of Lincoln. The FBI and the bloggers can go on looking for the secret server revealing a ping from a computer in Trump Tower directed at some Russian bank, but all that really matters is already out in the open, and has been for a while now, that there has been a total and irreversible realignment in international relations, precipitated by the collapse of the United States as a liberal democratic power, and its delivery over to an ogre-lacking speech, to evoke the line from Auden's poem, who stalks about his subjugated plain with drivel gushing from his lips. My country has fallen, like a body, and this was able to happen in large part because senseless loyalty made a party's supporters willfully blind to the patent truth that their party had been corroded from within and without. This was, by the time of Trump's nomination, a very, very bad party. No more erotic than beef jerky, fucked up but only in a moral sense, and, we'll grant it this much, totally focused upon advancing the status of its own members. It's not a party, as I've said, if it's not doing at least one of these three things. I don't go to parties, and I don't belong to them either. Looking back, it seems to me now that they turn bad as a general rule, that this is their natural motion. Friends end up in the ground, ska records in the drainage ditch, frat boys heaving over the toilet bowl, a narcissistic brute stealing the show, a terror unleashed on peasants for the crime of owning an uncollectivized cow. Heavens, keep me away from parties. Keep me home, safe with my thoughts and words, with my glorious view, from afar, outward onto the whole.
To hear more podcasts from Tank Magazine, be sure to subscribe through the iTunes Store. The theme music for this podcast is taken from Waiting Games by Kate Simcoe and the London Electronic Orchestra.